I had an affair with a guy who worked on the crew there, and I came out to visit him. He taught in Arizona.
She breezed into Anne Romano's world, sharp, brassy, unforgettable. And almost instantly, everything cracked. What happened when Mary Louise Wilson clashed with Bonnie Franklin wasn't just a TV feud. It exposed ambition, insecurity, and the hidden cost of comedy. Stick around, because the reason she vanished after 14 episodes will shock you. She walked onto the set like a storm no one saw coming. Mary Louise Wilson, cast as Ginny, was supposed to inject fresh energy into one day at a time. The show already had a strong foundation, with Bonnie Franklin at the helm as Anne Romano, but producers wanted another bold, witty character to shake things up. Ginny was brash, confident, and unapologetic, a single woman in her 40s navigating life with the same fire Anne had once brought to audiences. On paper, it looked like a perfect fit. In reality, it was the beginning of a clash that no one could ignore. At first, the excitement was genuine. Wilson brought Broadway credibility and comedic chops, traits that had already won her acclaim in theater. She had a sharp delivery that could flip an ordinary line into something electric. Behind the camera, though, there were whispers that her spark was too bright, that she wasn't just fitting into the ensemble, but stealing the spotlight. And for Bonnie Franklin, already carrying the weight of a hit show on her shoulders, that kind of energy wasn't welcome. Audiences were introduced to Ginny in 1976, and almost instantly the dynamics shifted. Anne Romano, who had been the center of the story, suddenly had to share screen time with someone who wasn't shy about chewing up every scene. Critics were divided. Some loved Ginny's sass, calling her a breath of fresh air. Others felt the character clashed with the show's heart, turning tender moments into loud comedy. The reaction backstage was even more divided. Wilson herself admitted later that stepping into the sitcom world wasn't easy. She felt like a misfit in a machine that was already finely tuned. Unlike Franklin, who thrived in the television format, Wilson's style came from live theater, big, commanding, and larger than life. While that made her stand out, it also made her stick out. Cast chemistry was everything, and the moment Ginny arrived, the chemistry started to crack. As Ginny became a recurring figure, little tensions behind the curtain began bubbling into real problems. Cast members noticed the strain, and the once harmonious set turned into a careful balancing act. Franklin, described as fiercely protective of her role and her show, didn't take kindly to being overshadowed. Even producers started to question if they had made a mistake introducing Ginny at all. Still, in those early episodes, no one on the outside knew the storm brewing behind the scenes. Fans were just watching a new character try to make her mark, unaware that within months, she would disappear without explanation. What led to that disappearance, though, wasn't just about ratings or writing. It was about a clash of egos that would leave scars on both sides. But it didn't take long before the first signs of that battle spilled into plain view. From the moment Mary Louise Wilson joined the cast, sparks flew, but not the kind that made for great television. The tension between her and Bonnie Franklin didn't explode in one dramatic blow-up. It simmered, quiet glares on set, conversations that ended colder than they began. Subtle power moves that told everyone in the room something wasn't right. Bonnie Franklin was the star. One Day at a Time revolved around Anne Romano, her struggles, her independence, her voice. Franklin wasn't just another cast member. She was the anchor. When Wilson arrived as Ginny, though, her theatrical energy threw everything off balance. Directors would give notes, and Wilson's lines would land differently than expected. Too big, too brash, too show-stealing. For Franklin, that wasn't just a character problem, it felt like a personal invasion of territory. The crew picked up on it quickly. Stories floated that Franklin became increasingly protective of her role, almost territorial. She'd reportedly make her preferences known during rehearsals, and it wasn't unusual for her to bristle when Wilson improvised or leaned too heavily into her Broadway instincts. Wilson herself later revealed that she often felt judged, saying the atmosphere made her feel like an outsider who couldn't quite crack the sitcom code. There were whispers that the producers had hoped Franklin and Wilson would become a comedic powerhouse duo. Two strong women, bantering and balancing each other. But what happened instead was friction. Every time Wilson leaned into her comedic instincts, Franklin seemed to tighten her grip on the spotlight. For Franklin, it wasn't just about lines. It was about the identity of the show. Other cast members noticed too. While no one went on record about taking sides, there's a sense that the energy on set shifted. What used to feel like collaboration started to feel like a quiet rivalry. Franklin's professionalism kept things from blowing up publicly, but insiders later admitted the vibe was undeniable. Wilson, meanwhile, started to internalize the friction. She admitted in interviews that she felt invisible, like her humor wasn't landing. The irony? She was funny, just not in the way the show wanted. Her theater-trained delivery clashed with the sitcom rhythm, and Franklin wasn't interested in adjusting her own style to meet Wilson in the middle. As episodes rolled out, fans at home saw a character who looked bold and confident. What they didn't see was the battle of egos behind the camera. By the time Ginny had been written into storylines, the air was already thick with conflict. It wasn't screaming matches or dramatic exits, just a steady buildup of two women refusing to bend. And as the pressure mounted, it became clear. One of them wasn't going to last. But the real shock came when the audience's reaction added fuel to the fire. Here's where the story takes a sharp twist. While Bonnie Franklin and Mary Louise Wilson were circling each other like rivals behind the cameras, the audience at home wasn't exactly clamoring for Ginny either. In fact, the response to Wilson's character was mixed at best. Viewers who tuned in for Ann Romano's heartfelt struggles suddenly found themselves face-to-face with Ginny's loud, almost abrasive energy. Some thought she was refreshing, a daring addition who broke the mold of what women in sitcoms were supposed to be. Others? They felt she threw the whole balance off. This disconnect became the most dangerous thing for Wilson. On one side, she was clashing with Franklin backstage, fighting just to breathe inside the rhythm of the show. On the other, she was facing lukewarm reception from the very audience who decided which characters lived or died. When you're in the television world, you can survive one of those battles. But both? That's a death sentence for any role. Wilson herself later confessed that she felt invisible, as though nobody on set or in the audience really understood her humor. She admitted bluntly that when the laughter didn't come, it crushed her confidence. "Nobody thought I was funny," she said, "and that made my bowels shrink." Brutal words that showed just how badly she felt out of place. Meanwhile, Franklin seemed more determined than ever to protect the tone of one day at a time. She had built the show into something audiences could rely on, grounded, heartfelt, even tender. Ginny's larger-than-life style threatened to yank it in another direction, and Franklin wasn't having it. Every lukewarm review, every shrug from the audience only reinforced her belief that Ginny didn't belong. Still, to casual fans, it was just another season. Characters come and go all the time in sitcoms, right? But those watching closely could feel the cracks forming. Episodes with Ginny often felt louder, less balanced. The heart of the show, Anne's bond with her daughters, was dimmed every time Ginny stormed into a scene. Audiences didn't riot, but they also didn't embrace her. And in Hollywood, indifference is worse than hate. By the time Ginny's arc hit the halfway point, the writing was already on the wall. Wilson felt isolated, Franklin grew increasingly frustrated, and producers saw the numbers beginning to dip. Something had to give. But the way it unraveled wasn't quiet, it was personal. And the words Wilson used to describe the experience would leave a scar that still lingers today. When Mary Louise Wilson finally spoke out about her time on One Day at a Time, the mask came off. Years later, in interviews and her own memoir, she revealed just how brutal the experience had been, and she didn't sugarcoat it. Wilson admitted she never felt welcome on that set. She described walking into rehearsals and sensing an invisible wall, as if everyone had already decided she didn't belong. The toughest blow? She confessed, "Nobody thought I was funny, and that made my bowels shrink." Those words painted a raw picture, not just of an actress struggling to find her rhythm, but of a woman suffocating under the weight of rejection. Her honesty was striking. Wilson had built her reputation on Broadway, where her humor sparkled in front of live audiences. On stage, she was confident, adored, and larger than life. But in the sitcom world, where timing and chemistry are everything, she felt stripped of her power. It was like being dropped into a foreign country where she couldn't speak the language. And the person least interested in helping her translate was Bonnie Franklin. Wilson recalled the icy atmosphere that followed her from day one. Every attempt to land a joke, every instinct she brought from theater, seemed to fall flat in the eyes of her co-star. The crew, she suggested, picked up on Franklin's cues. If the star of the show wasn't laughing, then neither was anyone else. That isolation cut deeper than any critic's review. But here's where it gets even more shocking. Wilson claimed she wasn't just ignored, she was erased. Writers began scaling back Ginny's presence, trimming lines, and reducing her impact in episodes. What was supposed to be a fiery, comedic sidekick quickly became a background character. She believed this wasn't coincidence. It was Franklin's influence quietly shaping the show's direction. For Wilson, every cut line felt like a message. You're not wanted here. Even more revealing were her thoughts on how sitcoms worked. She admitted that, unlike theater, where performers thrive on risk, sitcoms were about playing it safe. The rhythms were mechanical, designed to guarantee laughs from a live audience, and Wilson hated that structure. She described it as a machine, one where her creativity was crushed instead of celebrated. Her brutal honesty pulled back the curtain on something rarely discussed at the time: the emotional toll sitcoms could take on actors who didn't fit the mold. Wilson wasn't just talking about a bad work experience. She was exposing the hidden rules of television, the unspoken hierarchy, and the ruthless ways stars protected their territory. And yet, despite her pain, Wilson never threw Franklin directly under the bus. She never accused her outright, but the undertone was crystal clear. Franklin was the gatekeeper, and Wilson never had a real chance to win. But what made Wilson's revelations sting even more was that, behind the scenes, the numbers weren't lying, and they only added fuel to Franklin's case. Television is a business first, and numbers never lie. As the weeks rolled on, the ratings for One Day at a Time began to show small but worrying dips. The charm of Ann Romano's single mom storyline had been the heartbeat of the series, but with Ginny thrown into the mix, something in that rhythm faltered. Critics pointed out the imbalance. Viewers didn't seem invested in Ginny's problems the same way they were in Ann's. The comedy was there, but the emotional glue was missing. For Bonnie Franklin, this was the perfect ammunition. Every lukewarm review, every ratings slip, was proof that Ginny wasn't working. Producers started feeling the pressure. Television executives don't gamble on chemistry. They protect what's already winning. Franklin was the star, the face on the magazine covers, the reason people tuned in each week. Wilson was an experiment that, in their eyes, simply wasn't paying off. Behind closed doors, meetings grew tense. Writers were asked to scale back Ginny's presence, handing more storylines back to Anne and her daughters. By the time audiences noticed, Ginny had already been reduced to background moments, quirky interruptions, rather than a true co-star. What was supposed to be a strong secondary character devolved into a narrative burden producers were desperate to shed. But the reality wasn't so simple. Wilson wasn't just collateral damage of ratings. She was a casualty of clashing visions. The executives wanted harmony. Franklin wanted to protect her turf, and Wilson was stuck in the middle. Instead of evolving Ginny into something that worked, the team chose the easiest path: cut her loose. Wilson later admitted she could feel it happening in real time. Fewer lines, shorter appearances, less laughter. Each script was another reminder that she was fading out. And no matter how hard she tried to adapt, the decision had already been made in rooms she wasn't invited into. Fans didn't riot when Ginny disappeared. In fact, most barely blinked. And that silence spoke volumes. To executives, it confirmed what Franklin had believed all along. Ginny wasn't needed. The show was better without her. Still, the official story remained vague. Producers never announced a firing, and Franklin never went on record trashing her co-star. Instead, Ginny's exit was swept under the rug, left as an unsolved mystery for decades. But insiders knew there was more to it than just ratings. The question that lingered was this: did Wilson choose to walk away, or was she quietly pushed out? The answer depends on who you ask, and it's where the story takes its darkest turn. When Ginny disappeared from One Day at a Time after just 14 episodes, no press release explained why. No heartfelt farewell episode tied up her storyline. She was simply gone. And that silence is what fueled decades of speculation. Did Mary Louise Wilson walk away because she couldn't take the pressure anymore? Or was she forced out by Bonnie Franklin's influence behind the scenes? The official story was vague, almost suspiciously so. Wilson would later claim she didn't quit in the traditional sense, but rather felt she had no choice. She had been gradually erased, her role stripped down until there was nothing left to hold on to. According to her, the decision was made for her long before she left. Each script with fewer lines was like a door slowly closing in her face. By the end, she was already out without anyone needing to say it out loud. But then, there's Franklin's side, or rather, the absence of it. Bonnie Franklin never directly addressed the feud in public. She didn't speak about Wilson in interviews, and she certainly didn't acknowledge pushing anyone off the show. To her, the show was about Anne Romano and her daughters. Everything else was secondary. Insiders, however, hinted that Franklin had an enormous say in creative decisions. If she believed Ginny was derailing the show's heart, she had the clout to make sure Ginny didn't stick around. Some crew members reportedly believed Wilson wasn't cut out for television at all. They whispered that she was a stage actress lost in the rigid rhythm of sitcom timing. To them, the problem wasn't Franklin's ego. It was Wilson's inability to adapt. But others suggested Franklin's coldness made adaptation impossible. If your co-star doesn't support you, how can you find your footing? It's this blurred line, choice versus push, that makes Ginny's disappearance so fascinating. Wilson insisted she was never truly given a chance. Franklin never admitted to pulling the strings. And the producers? They quietly benefited from the decision either way, as the show stabilized once Ginny was gone. The result? Both women walked away carrying their own truth. Wilson bore the scars of humiliation and rejection. Franklin kept her show intact, her authority unchallenged, and the mystery of who made the final call lingered in Hollywood gossip for years. But the story doesn't end with Ginny's exit. What came after revealed just how deeply this clash etched itself into television history, and what Bonnie Franklin never wanted the world to see. When Ginny vanished from One Day at a Time, the show barely skipped a beat. Episodes rolled on, Anne Romano remained the heart, and audiences eventually forgot there had ever been another roommate in the mix. But in the shadows of that silence, the scars from the Franklin-Wilson clash never really healed. Mary Louise Wilson didn't disappear from show business. She returned to Broadway and found the kind of success that reminded her where she truly belonged. Theater welcomed her back, and eventually, she would even win a Tony Award. Yet, no matter how high she soared on stage, the ghost of One Day at a Time followed her. In interviews decades later, she still spoke of that time with a sting in her voice, revealing how deeply it had shaken her confidence. The pain of feeling erased never quite left. For Bonnie Franklin, the story was different. She continued to lead One Day at a Time for years, cementing her legacy as Anne Romano. The show thrived without Ginny, and Franklin remained the symbol of its success. To the public, she was the picture of strength and resilience. But behind closed doors, her reputation as a difficult co-star lingered in whispers. Some admired her toughness, her refusal to compromise on what she believed was right for the show. Others saw it as ego, a star unwilling to share the stage. The truth of what really happened between Franklin and Wilson remains murky. Was Franklin ruthless, quietly pulling strings to push Ginny out? Or was Wilson simply a misfit, someone who never belonged in the sitcom machine? The official record never gives a straight answer. What we're left with is a story shaped by memory, rumor, and speculation. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting. Two women, both talented, both powerful in their own ways, collided in a space too small for both to thrive. One walked away with her show intact. The other walked away wounded, but eventually redeemed. And the clash between them became one of those hidden Hollywood tales, buried under decades of silence, but never quite forgotten. Because at the end of the day, Ginny's disappearance wasn't just about a character fading from a sitcom. It was about what happens when egos, power, and insecurity collide under the bright lights of television. And the lesson is as chilling now as it was then. In Hollywood, survival often comes at someone else's expense. And in this case, that expense was Mary Louise Wilson.